This part is so fun, I love this. It's like an art project. It's like you're painting a canvas. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I'm making a truly unique pastry among pastries. It's called Strudel. It has one of the most fascinating and fun and unique doughs, which I'm very, very excited to make. It's gonna blow your mind. Not to be confused with streusel, which is something entirely different, but strudel is a flaky pastry, very commonly filled with apples, but can be filled with any number of fruit fillings. And today I'm making kind of a more spring-inspired version. So when I think about pastry, flaky buttery pastry is the best kind of pastry. And strudel accomplishes that in a very different way than a lot of other kinds of flaky pastry, which might become flaky through a process called lamination. If you check out the episodes where I make homemade puff pastry, strudel accomplishes that in a different way. It's not temperature sensitive the way that like a laminated pastry is, where the butter needs to stay solid. I can do it by hand. I'm not going to use a mixer. And today I'm going to be filling it with a cheese filling with sour cherries. Apple is kind of classic. You could do any number of fruit fillings, and I'll talk about why this sour cherry filling works really, really well. So the ingredients, I have 3 different components here. I have the dough, I have the cheese filling, and then I have the sour cherry filling. So for the dough, I'm using bread flour. That's important. You want a high gluten flour because you need gluten development to create a dough that's strong enough to be able to stretch very, very thin. Then this is just extra flour for kneading and also the stretching process. For the dough also I have a large egg, kosher salt, 1.5 tablespoons of neutral oil, and I'm gonna be adding water, but I need warm water, so that's not out yet. Then for the cheese filling, I'm gonna do some lemon. I have cream cheese, some sugar, 2 egg yolks. For the cherry filling, I have 2 24-ounce jars of sour cherries. They're lightly sweetened in a syrup. Then I have some sugar, a little pinch of salt, some cornstarch for thickening, some vanilla extract, which is also gonna go in the cheese filling. And then for assembly, I have 2 sticks of butter. That's gonna be for brushing the dough, and some almond flour. Special equipment, no like major appliance, no mixer or anything like that, but you do need a few different bowls for making all the different components. I have a small saucepan just for making the filling and melting the butter. Pastry brush. I have a rolling pin, a sheet tray with a piece of parchment paper, and then the sort of most like particular piece of special equipment is I have a cotton tablecloth. You need a kind of like thin cotton material for stretching the dough. You could use like a bedsheet if you didn't have a tablecloth. It's a really cool process for stretching the dough. Before I get into the recipe, I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. I'm so excited and proud to be partnering with Kerrygold again. Kerrygold Butter is my butter of choice for all of my baking at home. The butter is made from milk from cows that graze on grass in family-owned farms in Ireland, and Kerrygold for me is the creamiest, most buttery butter that's out there, so I use it in all of my baking. I especially love it in pastries that are laminated and flaky, like the strudel that I have in the oven, because it has both great flavor and texture. But it's also just the butter that I have at home for eating on toast in the morning, putting on pancakes, all of the above. So I want to thank Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. And for more information about Kerrygold and where you can find it, check out the link in the description below. And now back to our strudel. You don't need a mixer for this. I'm going to do it by hand. So I'm starting with 2 cups of bread flour. I'm gonna add a little bit of salt. This is a 1/2 teaspoon, kosher salt. And now I'm gonna mix my wet ingredients. You could do this in a stand mixer with the hook, but it doesn't require like an excessive amount of kneading, so it's doable by hand. I'm gonna start with 1 large egg. And this dough is based on a recipe from a very famous baker named Nick Malgieri, who's written several cookbooks, and is kind of like a master of a lot of this kind of Viennese style pastry. Then I'm gonna add 1.5 tablespoons of neutral oil. The oil is important because it keeps the dough really supple. A very important part of the recipe is that I'm gonna use pretty warm tap water, somewhere between warm and hot. Warm water is important because anytime you mix like warm or hot water into flour, it really kickstarts gluten production. You get a very like workable dough. So now I'm going to pour some hot tap water into here until I get to 2/3 of a cup. So that's why I have a measuring cup right here. Often you don't see egg included in strudel dough, but I'm using it here because it's sort of taking the place of the oil a little bit and it's enriching it a little bit. Now my water is hot. All right, so 2/3 of a cup. I'm gonna make a little well in the center of the flour. I don't like to get my hands directly into dough before the flour and liquid has been mixed, because what happens is your hands get wet and then the flour sticks to it and then it's just a challenge to get it off. So I'm just gonna start by mixing with the fork until it comes together. And the combination of oil and warm water makes the dough really, really soft in a good way and just easy to work with. Okay. So I have just a little bowl scraper here to help me gather the dough. I'm gonna turn it out onto a bit of a floured surface. And now I'm gonna start to knead by hand. The mixing for strudel dough is not very intensive. It doesn't require a very, very long mixing time the way that like brioche requires. It really just needs to be worked long enough until you get like a nice, smooth, supple dough, and not really beyond that, because yes, you need gluten development, but you don't want to develop so much strength that the dough is going to kind of like fight you and try to spring back. So that's why you could do this in a stand mixer with the hook, but it doesn't really require so much power. So I'm just gonna keep working until all these little bits are incorporated, and then I'm gonna keep kneading the same motion. It's really kind of like a pressing out, folding, kind of rotation of the dough, a folding, and then a pushing away from you. I'm just gonna continue until I get to that really kind of smooth, supple point. And if I find in working as the flour hydrates that the dough does start to stick to my hands or the surface, I can add a little bit more bench flour. I don't think I need to add any more flour. It's feeling really good. Like, it's not sticky, but it's nice and soft, not sticking to my hand and not sticking to the surface. So I'm just gonna continue to work this for probably another maybe 3 minutes or so, just until it's really smooth. And that's it. My dough is ready. You can see it's very smooth, very supple. When I press, it springs back. This is the same bowl that I mixed it in. I just gave it a quick rinse to remove any dried on flour. And then I dribbled a little bit of oil in it, like a few drops. And I'm just gonna spread it around. Same neutral oil in the dough. And now I just need a very, very thin coating of oil, and I'm gonna put the dough in. It has kind of a seam side and then a kind of rounded side. I'm gonna put it rounded side down just to kind of very lightly coat it in the oil, and then turn it over. So rounded side up, seam side down. And now I'm gonna cover it. And this has to rest. So you wanna give it at least an hour, and you can do it up to overnight. So I have 8 ounces of cream cheese. This is at room temp. And I'm gonna add to that a little bit of sugar. I'm also gonna add about a teaspoon of fresh lemon zest. And then I'm gonna keep this lemon. I'm gonna put a little bit of the juice in the cherry component of the filling. Now about a teaspoon of vanilla extract. I'm gonna start by working this together to incorporate the sugar. That's gonna help kind of loosen up the texture a little bit. And the room temp cream cheese is gonna make this step easy. It's gonna help to blend everything smoothly so I don't get lumps. And I'm adding to this 2 egg yolks. So I'm adding yolks. I don't really want to add too much moisture to this, especially with the sugar content here. It can really loosen up the texture, and I need the filling to hold its shape so that the pastry doesn't get soggy. And with other fruit fillings for strudel, you don't always see this actually, but really the filling should be pre-cooked. If you're doing apple, you could do pear. You really want to pre-cook the filling in order to not only soften the fruit so that the fruit isn't like al dente when the pastry is done, but you want to sort of remove and concentrate a lot of the water that's in the fruit. So I'm adding 2 yolks, again, just to not introduce a lot of moisture. And it's going to enrich everything. Really, really highlights how yellow our chicken egg yolks are. If you have a couple little lumps, you can run a whisk through it. Archie. For the cherry part, I'm using jarred sour cherries. I don't want to introduce like a super juicy fruit into the filling because it's just going to make everything really soggy. And I want to have this flaky pastry. So using jarred or canned sour cherries that are already processed, meaning they've been like cooked because they've been like cooked inside the can or the jar, is really helpful because they're sitting in their juice, but like have been cooked just enough that they're not going to like continue to release lots of juices when they're baked inside the strudel. So I'm going to start by draining these. Now, oh geez, hold on. Ow, oh God, I hurt my wrist. Oh God. Oh, hold on. There we go. So I'm going to drain these. These are not the easiest thing to find. A really well-stocked grocery store will have them. So sometimes you'll see them like in heavy syrup or light syrup. You want to find something in light syrup. Sometimes you'll also find them packed in water. But in this case, you want something kind of lightly sweetened, like a light syrup. Like for example, this says pitted sour cherries, but the ingredient list has sugar in it. Okay, there we go. So I'm gonna drain these. And I kind of want to taste one. So it's really, the amount of sugar that you're going to add to the cherry part kind of depends on how sweetened the cherries are already. They taste really good. They're not overly sweet at all, which is great. So now I'm going to reserve some of the syrup. You can see from the texture how it's like pretty watery looking. It's not like a really thick syrup, so you know you don't have a ton of sugar in there. So I have a recipe in What's for Dessert for a cherries jubilee, and I use jarred sour cherries for the same reason, which is that I actually, in that case, in order to flambe, like I don't want a fruit that's going to continue to like release all of its juices. Also, the jarred sour cherries maintain their structure really well. Like they have good integrity, so they're not going to just like kind of shrivel up or turn to mush when I bake them. So I'm going to set those aside. I'm going to measure out about 2/3 of a cup of the liquid. Let's do this over here. Oh my God, why is this so hard to pour? Okay. Now I don't really need the rest of the liquid. You can save it for cocktails. You could like add it to like a little seltzer to make like a sort of a light soda. That's kind of fun. So I'm gonna save this and just put it over here. I'm gonna start by taking 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. I'm gonna put it in my small saucepan. You know, I basically want to create, it's the same idea of pre-cooking an apple filling. It's like the filling is good to go. It doesn't really, nothing else needs to really happen to it. It just needs to kind of be warm. Really what you're doing is cooking the pastry when you're baking it. This is a 1/4 cup of sugar. I'm gonna add just a pinch of salt. I'm gonna basically make a slurry, but before I add the liquid, I just want to juice my lemon and get about a tablespoon of juice. Lemon juice and the vanilla extract will be added at the end. Now I'm gonna whisk in my reserved 2/3 of a cup of the cherry juices and whisk constantly so you don't get any lumps. The cornstarch and the sugar will basically dissolve. Be sure to get in all the contours of the saucepan. And the idea here is just to bring this to a boil. And what's gonna happen is it's gonna activate the cornstarch, it's gonna thicken the juices, and it's gonna turn it into this like very thick, glossy, kind of like translucent mixture. I really need to be paying closer attention because we are at a boil and we are done. Turning off the heat. So the heat is off. I'm gonna grab a spatula. I'm gonna scrape this mixture into my bowl. You can see how thick it is. And with just a 1/4 cup of sugar, I would describe this pastry as very, very lightly sweetened. There's a 1/4 cup as well in the cream cheese. So very lightly sweetened, but we can always give it like a really nice dusting of powdered sugar at the end. Okay, now I'm gonna add my 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. Then about a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Okay, and now I'm gonna fold in my drained cherries. I'm just pressing on them gently. I don't wanna kind of make this mixture now more watery by introducing more cherry juice. If you really had your heart set on using fresh sour cherries, the thing about sour cherries is even among stone fruit, they are very juicy, very, very juicy, and will release a ton of water. What you could do is basically lightly, you'd have to pit them, and then lightly poach them, you know, in like sugar water, and then do all these steps. It's just a lot. So here is my cherry filling. So I have a dough that I made last night. I stuck it in the fridge, but then I pulled it out this morning so it could come up to room temp. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean off my countertop and get set up with my tablecloth for the stretching of the dough. So this side of my kitchen island is actually a really nice surface area for doing this. A lot of times you'll see people doing this on like a dining room table because they need the kind of corners. You do need a lot of counter space. So I'm gonna start by flouring my surface pretty generously. Okay, you can always add more. So here's my rested dough, very, very lightly oiled. I'm gonna stick it in the center, give it a little flour on top. And now before I stretch, I'm gonna roll. So I have my rolling pin. I'm going to stretch this into a rectangle, so I'm just kind of rolling it lengthwise and crosswise at 90 degrees. And once I have it under about a 1/4 inch, I can start to stretch.
Would this be easier as a two-person job because you're like pulling corners?
This is easier as a two-person job, and so often what you can do is you can use the corners of your work surface as anchor points so that you can like anchor the dough on one side and then pull, and then pull with your two hands. I'm using the backs of my hands. This is like, in this stage, it's similar to stretching pizza dough. I don't want to use my fingertips because I don't want to create really thin spots, especially at this point. Okay, so you can see that the dough is starting to really thin itself out. And I'm gonna start now stretching on the surface into this kind of rectangular shape. So the sheet is there to prevent sticking and also to help you to roll up. You'll see that the dough is gonna be so thin, it's not something you can really handle by touching at the point at which you wanna use it. So the sheet is there to help you with the rolling process. I mean, if I had like a piece of parchment paper this big, I could use parchment, but it's just helpful. Like you can cover any surface with it. So I'm just gonna continue the stretching process, going kind of in both directions. If you feel like the dough is giving you a little resistance one direction, go the other way. And I wanna get this stretched out into a nice even rectangle, and I want it to be so thin that I can see the pattern of my tablecloth underneath. We took a pause in filming, and Cal and Vince helped me to stretch just by anchoring the dough in the corners so I could kind of pull against the resistance. So I have this super, super thin sheet now, and you can see like the polka dots and the circle here, so it's pretty even. I have some thin spots around the edges, like some little tears from just like pulling from the end constantly. If you had a tear in the middle, go ahead and try to patch it, but these will probably just get trimmed away anyway. So I'm gonna melt 2 sticks of Kerrygold unsalted butter. And the butter is gonna create a barrier between the layers of dough. So you're gonna get this sort of flakiness and separation. And it's also gonna, of course, give it like amazing buttery flavor, and the dough will absorb the butter as it bakes. So the dough itself is very neutral. Like I put a little bit of neutral oil in it, has just 1 egg in it. So that really the flavor of the pastry is gonna come from the brushing of the butter. So this is melted. I don't need it to be particularly hot or warm. It doesn't have to be cooled either. And now I'm gonna start getting this all over my pastry. This part is so fun. You can always add more. You want a thin, even layer, but like you also want to be generous. So if you see any dry spots, go ahead and fill them in. So I have this whole thing covered in butter. I'm now gonna add a very light, even dusting of almond flour. And the purpose of the almond flour, it's not really to give it any flavor at all. It's really there to create separation and to prevent the kind of full fusing of the layers together, to just enhance that flakiness. You could use another ground nut. You could also use fine breadcrumbs. So you can see that I'm holding my hand up high and sprinkling, and that's to sort of encourage the individual little tiny pieces of ground up almond to spread out and cover the surface area. I have more melted butter. I'm gonna save it for brushing the top of the strudel. So I'm going to start with just kind of getting an idea of the length here. I'm going to start by adding my cheese on the bottom. So just kind of doing this in dollops. And I'm going to go in a couple inches from the edge of the pastry. I had thought about piping this just to get a nice even layer, but I don't think it's necessary. So that's all of my cheese filling. I'm going to just spread it out a little to even out the thickness. So now it's time to add the cherry filling. Same thing, just kind of spoon it on top of the cheese. So I'm going for a kind of even thickness all the way across. It kind of depends on the dimensions of your sheet tray and your dough. And because I'm going for something a little bit shorter, I don't think I'm going to use all of my cherry filling. I have a wheel cutter. I'm going to trim off just like a half a centimeter of the dough from the edge closest to me, just because it's a little bit thick. So I'm going to just take that off. You're going to see why I used a sheet or a tablecloth. I'm going to use it to help me roll up the strudel. I'm just going to start flipping it. And you want to give it like a little bit of like a bump. I would say I was a little maybe overly generous with the flour, so I'm going to just brush off some of the excess flour. And so now I've ended with my cherries on top. I'm going to now trim off just the excess dough on the very bottom where it's a little bit thicker. I could have flipped it, but I want the cherries to be on top when it bakes. So now I have these thicker edges. I'm going to trim off the thicker ends. Get some of this flour away. And now I'm going to transfer this to my sheet tray. I'm going to tuck the ends on under first. And I am going to have to go on the diagonal to fit it. Once it's folded up, it's a little bit sturdier than you would imagine. I'm now done with my tablecloth. This will get shaken out. I have my oven at 400. So we bake this pretty hot, like a lot of kind of laminated pastries you want where there's layers to separate, you want kind of a puff of heat. I'm going to brush this very generously with more melted butter. I'm also going to dust it with a little sugar. You don't always see that, but I think it'll benefit from a little crunchy on top, and then we can still give it some powdered sugar for serving. So this is going to go into my oven, which is preheated to 400 degrees. I want it to be beautifully golden brown all over. And again, we don't really need the filling itself to like come up to a certain temp. Obviously the eggs need to cook in the cheese, but that like will happen at a much lower temp. So really what I'm trying to do here is cook the pastry all the way through. And it should take about 30 minutes. Strudel taste, take one. The strudel came out of the oven. I think it was in for like 30, closer to 35. It's nice and golden brown. It puffed a little bit. I didn't cut any slits in it. It's so crispy. It's warm, but I'm gonna cut it because I don't wanna wait. So I'm gonna try to transfer it to my cutting board. There's very little pooling butter on the parchment, so all that butter that I brushed on the surface of the dough before rolling and then before baking has been kind of absorbed into the pastry, and it's made it really crisp on the outside. So to cut through it, I'm going to use a serrated knife. So I'm expecting a little bit of an air pocket from the puffing in between the dough and the filling. Ooh. So crispy. Oh my gosh. All right, a little bit of running juices. Ow, it's actually so hot. I'm really gonna wait it longer. So excited to eat this. I think next time I would do a little less flour on the sheet because it does prevent sticking, but it also can dry out the dough a little bit and then make it a little harder to stretch. I think I could get it even thinner next time. Get even a few more layers maybe. I get like the scent of the lemon zest. I'm gonna get a bite with all the filling. I'm so glad I didn't add any more sugar. Oh, there's the perfect sweetness. The dough is so crispy. What's amazing about this pastry is the butter adds so much flavor and gives you that crispy texture on the outer layer of pastry and the kind of silky, soft texture on the inner layers, but it doesn't weigh it down at all. Like it still actually reads very light. This is delicious. Perfect for breakfast. It's just sweet enough. I think it could have a little bit of powdered sugar on top, but mostly as a garnish. It doesn't really need it. There's a lot to be gained from actually just letting it cool fully at room temp. I think it's going to improve the texture of the filling, but it is still kind of amazing served warm. I love this version, but it doesn't use fresh cherries. It's jarred. You can make this any time of year. You can make the apple version if that's the kind that you love. But a couple just important things to remember. You want to minimize liquid in the filling. You want to stretch the dough as thin as you possibly can. Get someone to help you if you need. It kind of more hands makes the job a little bit easier. But it's a really fun pastry and is a way of achieving that layered flaky effect without having to do lamination, which is very temperature sensitive, but you get all the buttery goodness of a laminated pastry. So this is strudel. I love the dough. It's kind of something I want to like keep making and try my hand at different fruit fillings and even maybe a savory one that could be so good. So I hope you enjoyed watching this episode. I want to thank our sponsor, Kerrygold. Check out the link in the description below for more on Kerrygold and where you can find it. It's my butter of choice for all my baking and just for eating at home. So thanks to Kerrygold, and thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.